Hi everyone, and welcome to this new episode of You Gotta Act, a podcast about actors and acting. Today we have a very special guest talking to us all the way from California, I believe. And it is writer, screenwriter, producer, director, Larry Karazewski.
Hello there. Hello there.
Hi, Larry.
Yeah, I'm coming to you from a very burning California right now. The entire state is on fire. It's really.
I saw.
You woke up this morning and there was like the smoke in the air and like you can't really see the sun right now. It's really a bit of a disaster.
I saw.
But
pictures.
I wanted to do this podcast so much. I came directly. I said, forget about it. My house is on fire, but I want to talk to Manuela.
Well, we really appreciate. I mean, you just have a right sense of your priorities, and I really respect that.
I'm gonna act like everything is okay.
Exactly.
So you just follow me. I'm like, hey, how are you? Oh, yeah, I'm just kicking back.
Exactly.
Things are burning.
It's just like that meme of the dog in the house on fire. It's like, this is fine. Exactly. No,
well,
I'm really sorry.
I'm the dog.
Exactly. But I'm really sorry that this is happening. I mean, I've seen pictures. It's surreal. It looks like a sci-fi film, but in a bad way, obviously. Yeah. So
a bad sci-fi movie.
Yeah, a bad one.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
all sci-fi movies are bad, though, aren't they? I mean, I guess maybe they're always like some oppressive thing that's hanging over the whole planet.
That's true.
They're very rarely is there a happy future.
That's true. I would have to think long and hard about optimistic sci-fi film, but yeah. So Larry, you are most known for writing with your co-screenwriter Scott Alexander, and you've written many films and some TV as well. And today you decided to talk with us about the great John Cazale. So do you pronounce it Cazale or Cazale? So we just had a conversation about how our names are pronounced. And I know that people say Cazale, but that sounds wrong.
I think Cazale. I think that's I mean, that's how everyone says it here. So
because there is an E at the end.
That's wrong.
Yeah. But it's kind
Cazale,
it's kind of like in The Godfather when they say the non-Italo-American characters, they say Don Corleone, and that's wrong. It's Corleone, you know what I mean? Anyway, so John Cazale. But before we get into Cazale, can you please tell us a bit about your journey yourself into filmmaking? Because you have done so many interesting things, and I think people would like to hear it from you.
Me and Scott and I are primarily known for writing kind of strange true life stories, sort of the alternate history of the 20th century a bit, leaning a little bit towards the entertainment world. We wrote a film called Ed Wood with Tim Burton and Johnny Depp, and Martin Landau won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for that movie. And we followed it up with The People versus Larry Flint, which is another kind of controversial film, but Woody Harrelson was nominated for Best Actor in that film. And, the other big ones are like Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey.
Which I watched
Big
last
Eyes.
night.
Oh, you watched it? Okay,
last
good.
Night, yeah.
We can talk about it if you want to. Big Eyes with Amy Adams and Christoph Waltz. And more recently, we created American Crime Story and primarily did season 1, the People versus O.J. Simpson, which we were very, very proud of. That was our baby. And last year we had a movie called Dolomite Is My Name, starring Eddie Murphy. We really loved that movie. That was a great experience. Mm-hmm. So, I've done other things since. I grew up in Indiana. My mom was a waitress. My dad worked in a factory, but I fell in love with movies very, very early on. And so I sort of used it as an escape. And I came out to California, and I always had this kind of bizarre confidence. And even though I was from a blue collar background and didn't know any writers growing up, I sort of, I felt it was something I could do. Actually, strangely enough, in the beginning, I thought I'd be an actor, but because when you're a kid, when you go to the movies, you instantly just totally identify with that person on the screen. There's no way you cannot look at a Paul Newman movie and say, oh, that's Paul Newman. I want to be Paul Newman. But it's only after a certain point where you realize, wait a second, there's a sort of a power behind the lens. There's a creative team making this movie. And strangely enough, I think my epiphany moment was with a John Cazale film, The Conversation. I think that I saw that movie and I was like, 11, 12, 13, something like that. And I think that was I always knew whatever. I was in the movie, so I knew there was a director. I knew there was a writer. I knew there's a person taking the pictures, but I didn't really overly think about them. When I saw The Conversation, Coppola really made an impression on me. And it was when Coppola was having that insane run for Godfather, Conversation, Godfather 2, right back to back to back. And so, you know, The Conversation is a much smaller, intimate film, and that really affected me. And I really thought about how the writing, the directing, the sound design, the acting, it all blended together, but there would seem to be one vision behind that, and that was Francis.
I totally agree. Couldn't say it better.
Yeah.
I didn't know you first wanted to be an actor, though. That's really appropriate.
Well, I started out as I was very lucky in the town I grew up in. There was a television show on the NBC affiliate there called Beyond Our Control. It was sort of a Saturday Night Live or Second City TV. Actually began before either one of those shows existed, and it was a weekly half-hour television show that was kind of written, directed, and starred kids, high school students. I mean, it just was this godsend to us. I mean, I really don't feel like I went to high school in South Bend. I kind of did Beyond Our Control. And, you know, you'd write scripts on Monday and Tuesday night. You'd cast them on and have a full company meeting on Wednesday. You would rewrite on Thursday. You'd build sets on Friday. You'd shoot it on Saturday. You'd be on TV on Sunday. Amazing. And this was, you know, this went on forever. And, so, you know, I was like, it was like being on SNL. You can sort of like write your own bits, and it was primarily a comedy show where the gimmick was someone had taken over your television. So it was channel switching. You'd go to one station for a couple of minutes, you go to another channel, then you go back and forth. And so we had a lot of fun, but it really taught me more than anything was that you have to get things done. You know, like a lot of writers, you know, wait for the muse to hit them, or, you know, you won't finish something. So many writers are working on the same thing for 2 years or 3 years or something like this. But because I learned writing and that way, you know, it was like, well, it was going to be on Sunday, whether it was good, bad, or ugly, you know. So, you know, you learn to say, this is, you know, get it as good as you can and finish it. And you just pumping out that material just makes it a well-oiled machine. But I was an actor on that. And I think when I came out to California, you know, it was actually before I got to California, I realized this, that I'm not a dummy. I'm a fan of filmmakers. I'm a fan of films and television. I sort of looked at myself and, you know, what's the best case scenario? I'm the sort of a funny next door neighbor, the chubby guy who rings the doorbell and comes in. And that's really, I was a little bit, you know, right there during my time period, there was John Belushi floating out there. So there was a chance, you know, I thought for a second I'd trying to go to Second City or something like that and, you know, go the John Belushi route. But I decided not to do that. But it was a great experience, and I'm not the only person. I mean, Daniel Waters, who wrote the movie Heathers and Batman Returns, Dean Norris is a great actor. He was played in Breaking Bad.
All right.
Dave Simpkins did Adventures in Babysitting. The person who invented that TV show Blue's Clues. I don't know if you have Blue's Clues in Europe. So. It was a children's show out here. So there's a lot of people.
Wow.
Got their start in this show in a very small town in Indiana.
Amazing.
You know, so yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm jealous. I wish I had any kind of outlet like that. It's amazing. Yeah. So you said you first noticed Cazale in The Conversation.
I mean, I probably noticed him, you know, I saw The Godfather, but I was a little young to see The Godfather. But I mean, you know, this Cazale is such an interesting actor because he only made 5 films. He made 5 films. All 5 films are nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, and they're 5 of the most amazing movies that exist from the 1970s. It's just an insane body of work. And then unfortunately he died of cancer. And you know, he's not the star of any of these movies.
Yeah, and he wasn't nominated.
So I think no, he was never nominated.
Any of them.
I mean, he wasn't really. You know, he wasn't. I mean, he was discussed back then as being like a great actor, but I think his legend has grown greater and greater and greater over time, because I think he proves that adage. You know, what is it? There are no such thing as a small role, only small actors or whatever. Because he infuses these fairly small parts with a real personality and a real character and an alive human being. So when you watch The Godfather over and over again, you watch Conversation over and over again, or Deer Hunter, or Dog Day Afternoon, you know, you get a real sense who this person is not John Cazale. You don't know who John Cazale is at all, but who that character is. I mean, like when The Godfather came out, I mean, he's in only 10 minutes of The Godfather.
Wow.
You know, but he's in 10 minutes of The Godfather, and The Godfather's like 3 hours long. But he makes an impression, and everything he does as Fredo, you know, that winds up paying off in Godfather 2 is totally there in Godfather 1. And that's before they even knew there was going to be a Godfather 2. So what he's just...
yeah, totally.
He's a very powerful actor.
I was just thinking earlier today that I remember when I was young and, you know, The Godfather would be on TV, for instance. And, you know, I obviously was too young to understand anything, but I just remembered Fredo and his face and just everything about this character. And I think it had something to do with just the fact that he looked so like a normal guy. Like, you know, he didn't look like a movie star. But also it was his acting, because he really felt like a real person, as in, like, you know, you see Fredo just this first scene when he's drunk at the wedding and he comes to say hi to Michael. And you know so much about him just in that little moment. Just by the fact that even though he's drunk, he's nice, he's kind of goofy and kind of embarrassing, but he's sweet. And he's drunk by himself. Like, there's so much in just that moment, and it really stays. No,
you say completely correctly that is that opening scene, which is, you know, a lot of actors would play comically or bigger. I'm the drunk guy. Nothing's worse than playing a drunk, you know. Yeah. But he comes in and he's Michael's older brother, but right away you know this guy's, you know, he's a little, you know, he's not Michael, he's not Don Corleone, he's not Sonny. He is, you know, he's this little sweet drunk guy who just wants to kiss. He wants to be loved, and that's Fredo's thing the entire time. He wants respect, he wants love, but he's just not. He doesn't have it. Yeah. And which was interesting at the time. I think one of the reasons why, you know, he wasn't talked about that much at the time, when you see The Godfather and it just came out, like, there was all these actors making their first appearance. So it was like, you know, Al Pacino was landing, and even like James Caan was like, he was a man of action. He was going to star in movies. So he didn't walk out of that movie initially talking about Fredo. Yeah, yeah. But as time goes on, it's like, wow, Fredo. Yeah. You know, also we can all identify with that, because we're not mobsters. We're not all men of action. Mm-hmm. At least me. You might be a man of action. I'm not sure.
I'm not answering that question.
But what's interesting about Cazale, almost all his films, he plays someone who is a part of the group, but kind of outside of the group,
on the sidelines.
You know, Fredo is a Corleone, but he's not one of the main guys. He's not like he so wants to be. You know, stand in the conversation. You know, he wants to be Harry Call's equal, but Harry won't even tell him what the job's about. So he wants desperately to be a main player or a partner, just like like in Godfather, where he's like, I was stepped over. He was, he's like that. He's like, Harry won't make him a partner. And in The Deer Hunter, he's not. There's all the guys who go. I mean, that's another movie where he's in it very little, but he's not in the second act of the movie. He's the friend back home who doesn't go to war. Yeah. So when they all come back, he's still there, and he's a bit of a chicken. He's playing with his guns and things like this, but he's not really, he doesn't have the pain and the horror that the other guys have. So to him, violence is he's a bit of a clown. And that's the thing of it is, like, a lot of actors might have played most of these characters maybe as clowns or as outsiders, or would have somehow winked at the audience, like say, because actors don't like to play weak. They don't want people to. I mean, Fred Roos is a brilliant casting director. He's Francis' casting director, and he found he helped find all those actors. He found Cazale doing a play with Richard Dreyfuss, and the second Francis saw him, he was like, "That's Fredo." But part of the thing was, every big actor in Hollywood wanted to play Don Corleone. Everyone wanted to play all these big parts. And sort of there wasn't a whole lot of people wanting to play Fredo. I want to be the sad, weak brother. That's not, actors don't want to play that, because you become that part. You can get typecast. You can become Tony Perkins after Psycho or whatever. All of a sudden you are Fredo,
That's true. I mean, we didn't really get to see if that happened, because obviously he passed away quite young, but Yeah, it's true. And I watched an interview with Philip Seymour Hoffman, who was talking about Cazale, and he said something really on point, I think. He said that Cazale had a very like destabilizing vulnerability. Like, he was always the most vulnerable actor on set. And according to Philip Seymour Hoffman, that kind of pushed the other actors to be like, oh, I need to work hard, because this guy was doing it. And he wasn't afraid of being the weak or vulnerable or shy or ridiculous guy, because that was his job. It was. I think that really expressed that really well.
He makes everybody better because he's just not. He is so totally in the scene, and he's totally he is not overplaying. He's a great underplayer, but you can tell that everyone, when they're working with him, their game gets a bit raised. And that's probably why Pacino worked with him 3 times.
Yeah, and he also did a lot of plays with him, I think. In an interview, he explained that, he says he probably learned from John about acting the most than from anyone else. And and I think you're right. I think they kind of... I was thinking the same thing, actually, the other day. In Dog Day Afternoon, it's interesting how the energies are kind of reversed from The Godfather, because it's kind of like suddenly Pacino is the crazy, impulsive one who's really trying to make a point, and Cazale is more withdrawn and interior, like focused on himself. But together they can really go in those places and switch around and play in a very like real way, I thought.
Yeah, no, totally. That's and Dog Day Afternoon. It's funny. Another actor probably would have played that guy more threatening and dangerous, and maybe a bit of a thug, you know. Totally. And he plays him. You know, he's a little bit dangerous in the beginning, but like he becomes withdrawn and quiet the entire time.
And that makes him more scary.
Yeah,
I think
when he has that speech with Pacino, where it's like, "Hey, you know, did you mean it when you said we're going to start throwing bodies at the door? You mean you're going to, you know, I think I could do it."
Yeah.
And now that is a weird, because he's saying it so quiet, you can tell that he's been sitting there for the like 10, 15 minutes wondering, well, can I actually kill these people? Yeah, you know, if he tells me to kill him, I will. You know, so it's like actually that's a terrifying moment. And if any other actor played it, they would have played it as like, I'm not badass, but it's more like you know you're the killer. He's not playing it as a killer. He's playing it as a and it's interesting. Lumet didn't want John Cazale at all.
Really?
Pacino suggested him, and apparently because that's based on a true story, and you know, the real person was much younger, like 19 years old, and so in the script he was written as a 19-year-old, and you know, Lumet just knew him as Fredo, and he was like, no, I don't, it's just, this guy is not Fredo, it's not Fredo. And it was like and then he did it as a favor to Pacino. I'll meet him and he can read. And he came in, and Lumet was like, "Oh fuck, it's a completely it's a reinterpretation of the role without changing the role." That's a very rare actor that can do that, where it's like it's written in a certain way, but if you just play it a little differently, a little more quiet, is a totally different person there. I mean, I think that had happened one time really big in my career was I made a horror film called 1408, based on a Stephen King story.
Love that film.
Oh, thank you. I love that film too. It doesn't get quite the talk that some of my other stuff does, but I think I was very happy how everything kind of works in that movie. But Sam Jackson plays the manager of the hotel, and he's barely in the movie, but he has a big scene where he tries to talk John Cusack out of checking in. And as written in the script, Mr. Olin is kind of an officious kind of guy. He should be, you know, we were thinking when we were writing it more like a Ian Holm or, you know, or Anthony Hopkins kind of guy, the sort of the manager of the hotel. He's, you know, everything should be proper and like, you know, don't go in there. It's messy, you know, that kind of thing. And I believe it was Tarantino who suggested Sam for the part. And it was like, holy, I don't know, man. It's like, you know, Sam Jackson's one of the world's greatest actors, but God, Sam Jackson, Ian Holm. You don't think of them playing the same parts. We're like, if we're gonna cast Sam, let's go look. We don't have to change a lot. And we just started reading it as Sam Jackson, and it was, holy shit, we don't have to change a thing. This is amazing because, you know, Ian Holm telling Cusack not to go in the room. It's more like, you know, there's this sort of more of a prissy guy saying the room is scary. Sam Jackson saying, don't go in that room. Well, if the room is fucking scaring Sam Jackson, you better, you know, John Cusack's going to get his ass kicked, totally. You know? So all of a sudden it was like off the page, it just jumped. And, but that's the same kind of thing where like also just by the right casting and the right interpretation of an actor can totally change the part. Yeah. And that's the thing about, you know, like Stan in The Conversation. It could have just been a normal guy. It just could have been, you know, it could have been just someone who fades into the background. He's really, you know, it's strange. Cazale is often so much better than the part because of what he brings. So
he really,
you know,
proves that, you know, the fact that, there's no small parts, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. I mean, yeah. It's funny because he reminds me a lot of Montgomery Clift in some ways, because they both played these kind of, you know, kind of regular guys, but with a twist or with just a lot of personality. And actually, when I was thinking that, and then I Googled it, and I found that apparently Montgomery Clift was Cazale's favorite actor, so that's great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it kind of makes total sense to me because I feel the same willingness to be vulnerable and willingness to really look at the character they're playing and respect the character and not make a fool of the character, even if the character is a fool, as in, you know, Fredo. And,
right.
But it kind of feels different in their careers because I think like the cinema of the 70s, you know, with all the new Hollywood directors, it really was made for this kind of realistic, really technically demanding acting. Whereas the cinema of the time of Monty was more, you know, it was still kind of not there yet. It was still quite, how can I say, like theatrical. That sounds wrong, but, you know, kind of
was old Hollywood.
Classical.
It's old Hollywood versus new Hollywood, yeah.
And it's interesting how that makes... that style of cinema makes Monty kind of sometimes disappear in his films. Whereas Cazale, in the cinema that he got to be a part of, he stands out because the form matches his style. And I just found that amazing. And I kind of wonder if his career had gone on, like how would he have adapted and how would that have evolved? I mean, I guess we can compare to other guys of his era, but... yeah.
But you know, it's funny. I mean, the other thing Cliff had hanging over his shoulder was the fact he was a good look. You know, at least for a part of his career, he was a good-looking guy, and so he often got the leads. And so what Cliff was doing in the middle of the lead is different than what Cazale's doing on the sides. Cazale, you know, this is not really fair to call him, but it's like I wouldn't call him Peter Lorre, but the way Peter Lorre could play an M was playing a child molester. Yet he's so vulnerable. Yeah. And so, you know, you actually are feeling for Peter Lorre. Like, you know, they got to get rid of him, but he's like, you know, you really are feeling for him. And that's the thing about Cazale and so many movies, like Fredo. Fredo should be despicable. Yeah. I mean, Fredo is a fool. Fredo sets up his brother to be murdered. He's everything about him should make you hate him. But instead, you hate Michael for killing him. Yeah. You know, it's like, you know, you fall on that side where I think it's at Mama Corleone's funeral in Godfather 2, where Cazale is just a friggin' wreck, and Al has said he's never going to see him again. And then Talia Shire goes to him and says, like, you know, he's so helpless without you, Michael. I'm not going to cry because this is like, you know, Fredo is totally lost without this thing. And so Michael goes over and hugs him, and Cazale just is hugging him so tight and shaking kind of. And then Al does a sort of a look over to Neri, and it's like, oh, well, you know, that's not going to last long. Yeah. It's so cold.
Yeah, it's.
But it's interesting. Also, I'm really dominating the conversation. I hate that. So sorry.
Go for it. That's what you're here.
I'm one of those guests like, oh, Jesus Christ, he just talked and talked and talked, you know. We couldn't even get to dessert.
We get those sometimes, it's fine.
you're talking about Cazale was so lucky to be in the cinema of the 70s, and it is so true. He, and it's absolutely terrible that he died. That's also part of the legend, and that he made these 5 kind of perfect films. He didn't have to go and be the store owner in a Rodney Dangerfield picture, you know what I mean, or a John Candy movie, or Adam Sandler picture. I'm not knocking any of those guys. I like them, but you know what I mean. Like a lot of those guys had to, Al Pacino eventually had to make Jack and Jill. You know, so there's a lot. The cinema in the 70s was different than any other time. So there's a kind of a perfection to what Cazale did and what he did in those 5 movies. That once you get beyond 1980, it's movies get taken over by the Goonies and things like that, and then you're off to a whole nother thing. And there's not really a place for guys like this. I mean, I said Rodney Dangerfield kind of randomly, but instantly I think of Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci's in Raging Bull. He's amazing. I think the next time he shows up, he's playing Rodney Dangerfield's assistant in Easy Money or something. You know what I mean? Because what do you do with these guys?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, a guy who I can see Cazale becoming, or whatever is look at Steve Buscemi's career. Buscemi is sort of that same kind of thing where he's technically, he looks kind of he looks like Cazale in Dog Day Afternoon, kind of in a weird way. He's been great in that part, but the same kind of thing where he's threatening, but he's also, there's a sweetness, and he's a puppy dog, and he's a villain at the same time. So there's that kind of thing. Buscemi's kind of maintained that kind of career.
That's true. But it's interesting you say that he's kind of tragic character of the 70s, because you yourself are extremely interested in tragic and talented people, or people who think they're talented. I don't know, who are talented, who no one else thinks they are talented. Right. More like, so it's
They're swimming against the stream. They are swimming against the stream, exactly.
Because all your characters, like Ed Wood, obviously the worst director ever, apparently, and even Larry Flint, the free speech martyr and all that. What is it that attracts you so much to these tragic, talented people?
Well, I think it's because, before Scott and I came along, the biopic was they were all about great men. They were all about these people who did noble things. It was Gandhi, it was Patton, it was these 3 hours things that were sort of cradle to the grave. These kind of long, kind of boring. I mean, biopic gets a bad rap because they're usually pretty boring. This is something we discovered after Ed Wood, but every couple years, every decade, or every the gangster film gets reinvented. The Western gets reinvented. The biopic never got reinvented as a genre. There wasn't a revisionist biopic. So we're the revisionist biopics. We came in and said, well, no, let's look at sort of the underbelly of success, and people who have a lot of passion for what they're doing, but society is telling them that's wrong. And so inherently there's conflict. There's constant conflict, and they're constantly having to push their wares, and they're usually never that successful. But there's some reason things lived on after them. I mean, whether it's like Andy Kaufman wants to make comedy that's not funny. He basically sort of has performance art is his thing. And Dolomite. Eddie Murphy is amazing in Dolomite, because it's like, no one really gets where he's coming from. And it seems ridiculous what he's doing. He seems foolish what he's doing. And yet a lot of times it's about the personal passion. He believes in what he's doing. Ed Wood believes in what he's doing. And, a lot of times when people have bad movie festivals or go watch bad movies, you can tell the people who are making it didn't believe in what they were doing. I think the reason people Scott and I are attracted to are people, no one else may like it, but God damn it, that they did. They were making, in a sense, the most personal filmmaking of all. They were making movies literally off the top of their head for what they like.
Just for themselves.
Just for themselves and their friends, and they wanted to make them, and they did it, and it's got their personality all over it. And it was funny, like even Ed Wood movie before our film they were just laughed at. They were always totally laughed at, and there's some sense they're still laughed at today. But something like Glenn or Glenda, you watch Glenn or Glenda now, knowing Ed Wood's personal story, knowing that's the thing. It's like it's impossible to laugh at. It's like basically you're watching saying this is a experimental, powerful, personal film. It's not that that's ridiculous, which is like that's what people thought of when it got rediscovered in the late 70s.
Yeah, I actually studied the Ed Wood film, the Planet one. What is it called?
Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Plan 9 from Outer Space in school, in film studies. I was like, look at this bad film. It was interesting. Is also I said I watched Man on the Moon last night, and I can't say I enjoyed the experience because I just find him so difficult. But as a film itself, I found it fascinating, and I also know it's interesting. I also found it fascinating for Jim Carrey's performance, because obviously that's a total performance, like it's total devotion. And that kind of reminds me...
Have you seen the documentary Jim and Andy?
Yeah.
By any chance? Okay.
I actually
so you see
saw
that first, or you saw...
Yeah.
That's funny.
I saw the documentary first, and I was like, I'm never going to watch this film. But then I did.
Right.
And it was
You've always been terrible at watching my work. You've been terrible. You saw Plan 9 from Outer Space, but you didn't see Ed Wood. Now you watched the documentary about Jim and Andy, but you didn't watch Man on the Moon. You know, so you watched Versace season, but you didn't watch OJ. Have you watched OJ yet? Have you watched OJ
No,
yet?
not yet. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're a sad person. You are a sad person. Why am I doing this? Why am I being your friend here on this podcast?
Because you're nice.
Is it over yet? Is it over yet? I don't know. Is it time? Seems like I gotta go.
I'm gonna email.
And I mentioned my house was burning. My house was burning. I mean, I'm still talking to you. It's really terrible here.
I'm gonna email my film school and tell them that we should watch Ed Wood instead, because I really mean that. I think it would be much more helpful.
It's here's the thing about Ed Wood and Dolomite, even a little bit more. Have you seen Dolomite?
Not yet.
Oh my God, you're terrible.
My Netflix was not working. It's not my fault. It wasn't working.
Yeah. Oh, it never worked. It's never worked since October. You are a liar and a horrible person.
I'm gonna catch up after this conversation.
Okay, fine. Don't email your film school. Just you watch this shit first.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I'll show by example. But yeah, so
there was no this week, like I'm gonna talk to Larry, I better watch like some of his movies. No, you didn't do any of that.
I have other things going on. Like I have so much going on.
Like I don't have other things going on than watching Cazale's movies and prepping for your podcast.
He's made only 5 films and you've seen them many times. It's fine.
Okay.
So what was I saying? So Man on the Moon.
Jim Carrey.
Because obviously I think his acting style, it can't really be compared to Cazale's, but it's kind of a similar dedication to the character and to really becoming a person. And when I watched the documentary...
Well, Jim did much more of the sort of like, taking method as far as he possibly could. Exactly. So he became Andy and Tony for the entire shoot. So I don't think Cazale did that kind of stuff. But basically Jim used Man on the Moon as a way to just become Andy Kaufman.
It's kind of backwards.
He just totally inhabited the person 24 hours a day. As long as you couldn't refer to Jim as Jim on the set. You had to refer him as Andy or Tony. And but it's interesting for that complete immersion. You are correct. The movie at the end of the day there's a distancing thing about the film, and that's sort of on purpose. I mean, some of our movies have sometimes, because they're like fringe biopics, they've been called, and we had a phrase, anti-biopics. Mm-hmm. Anti-biopics, as we usually say, it's anti-biopic because it's a biography of someone who doesn't deserve a biography. But this Man on the Moon is, I think, a real anti-biopic, in that I remember Milos, as the movie was coming out, he leaned over to Scott and he's like, this is a very unusual film. You actually know less about Andy Kaufman when you come out of the theater than you did coming in. And he's right. you come into the movie theater saying, oh yeah, Andy Kaufman's kind of funny. I saw him do Mighty Mouse. I saw him do Taxi. This is kind of good. And by the end of the movie, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, what do I know about this guy?
Yeah.
We attempted to do there, whether we're successful or not, was an onion, where like the more you peel, you think you're getting to the real next level, next layer, and then there's nothing there.
My feeling
go ahead.
My feeling was that you were trying to express kind of the essence of who Andy Kaufman was through showing his process, and with that ending that's quite ambiguous, like whether he's dead or not. And it kind of like, I don't know anything about him really. I knew vaguely that he was a comedian and a weird one, but yeah, I really got the sense of a personality rather than a life story, if you want. Like it was more about who, like the personality, the thought process of this guy than it was about what happened to him, which I think is totally valid and totally interesting. Like it's same with Edward. I mean, obviously there's a story, but like it's more you kind of take this character, you put him in situations that are standard, like career stuff, and you see what he does, and you're just like, why? And it feels so. It's kind of captivating and also distancing, and makes you think a lot about why the world is a certain way and why can't you do things differently. So I appreciate it for that. It just was a difficult watch.
Our films question whether mainstream thought is what is really, whether that should be the accepted way. Here's the thing about like even the ending of Man, and when we make these movies, we always think, what will this person be remembered for? And part of Andy Kaufman's legend is that when he died, people didn't believe that he died because he was a boy who cried wolf. There's so many times that he had kind of fixed people and got people like worked up that no one really believed it. So for us, we wanted to go out on a moment of total Andy Kaufman moment. I mean, you are correct. That movie more than the others is trying to tell a person's story by showing. It's kind of almost like a performance film. They're showing how his act reflects his personality and how they interact between what he does on stage and what he does in real life. I mean, most of our movies aren't really about like I said, aren't cradle to grave. It isn't that biopic thing where they break down, they talk about how their dad beat them that's kind of our problem with most biopics, because you make a movie about a great painter, and why do you care about that great painter? You care about the great painter because of how he paints or how she paints and how the art gets made. That's what that's what you want to know. But instead it's always about, oh, I got married to that person, and now I'm an alcoholic. And to us, that's like actually the least important thing about that person. Who cares? To me, it's like when I want to know the story of Rudy Ray Moore, I want to know how he made those records. I want to know how he made those movies. I want to know how he got this whole act together. And we'll do a little bit of like, how his real life infected that art. But there's these people's stories are how they created this stuff. And to us, it's like, actually, I feel like the other stuff is more superficial, because the other stuff is just trying to, oh, this is what happened, and that stuff is the mundane stuff. I don't want to, I'm not picking on, Jackson Pollock. I mean, that movie is a fine movie, but, it's and that movie does get into the art. So I'm picking on the wrong movie, but there are movies about people that you barely even get to their stuff. Yeah. Because they're too busy talking about how their dad didn't love them. And totally. That's like, I don't care whether they love them or not.
It's kind of like gossipy in a way. And like, I don't give a shit about that. I'd rather, it's kind of the same approach I have to actors. Like when I talk about actors, I don't want to talk about their private life, unless obviously it has an impact on their work. But like the point is to talk about the work.
One last thought on Man on the Moon though was, go for it. We had, because Andy is so amorphous, we had trouble trying to figure out that movie and how to structure it and stuff like this. And we were interviewing all the people who knew him. And Lynn Margulies came in, and she's a woman that Courtney Love plays in the film. she's a filmmaker as well. And she came in and she said, I just don't know how you guys are going to do this. I promised Andy I was going to make a film about him, but when I tried to do it, I just couldn't figure out how you turn his life into a film. And she said, that's what she said. And then we answered, well, we're doing all this research because we want to find the real Andy. And she looked at us and said, there was no real Andy. And that gave us chills. And we thought, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's the movie. That's the movie.
That's why it gave me chills the whole film. I was just like,
yeah.
Who is this guy? What does he want from me?
Yeah.
But like to go back to Jim Carrey. So as the writer of this film with Scott Alexander, did you have any input on what he was doing as the performer of your character? Like how did that work? Like do you have any reservations about his decision to become Andy?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, it's you always have reservation was some of the. It's more like the production manager in me rather than the writer. It's like, was some of this necessary and all this other stuff? Why were you driving Milo so crazy? He committed to the part, and it's part of the. Once again, that's part of the legend of the film. It's such a legend of the film that there's even a documentary about it. So it'd be hard for me to, if the movie doesn't capture a certain sweetness Andy had, that's a little bit of a drag, perhaps, because I do think that there was a little bit of, what we're talking about Cazale, there was a little bit of a puppy dog nature to Andy that maybe the movie doesn't quite get. And I'm not blaming Jim for that. And sort of the movie just doesn't quite get that enough. Probably his sweeter side before.
There are moments when he's really sweet.
But that is, I've been very blessed. Almost all of our biopics have insanely good lead performances. I mean, they've all, whatever. Martin Landau won an Oscar. Jim Carrey won a Golden Globe. Amy Adams won a Golden Globe. Almost every cast member from OJ won an Emmy. Eddie, was nominated for a Golden Globe. So there's one of those things where almost all our films use, that we write parts that, if the right actor connects with it, they can be very powerful.
And about that, do you allow any kind of improvisation on your text, or how does that work? Because, like, for instance, Cazale, I know, for instance, on Dog Day Afternoon, the whole process of the film was they rehearsed for 3 weeks, I believe, and that's how they built the dialogue and everything. And then once on set, they just kind of recaptured those moments they had prepared already. And I think that you can really feel it in the film. You sense this, it feels so real, basically. It's this realness of classic 70s films.
Although, here's the thing, that's a brilliant script. So I would say that a lot of times you hear these things, they did improv and they did this, and you go back and you read Frank Pearson's script, it's Dog Day Afternoon. Frank Pearson's a master. Actually, it's funny, there's one thing that I share with Frank in Dog Day Afternoon. I've always heard Dog Day Afternoon, they actually shot his first draft where they improvised and things like that, but they shot his first draft. And Ed Wood, Tim shot our first draft.
Oh, amazing.
So, the improvising thing is sort of, you want actors to bring themselves to the part. You don't want them just to be acting and saying the lines. And generally that's not this thing that people think is like some it's still the scene. Here's the thing. We write a very, very, our scripts, every scene has a point. So if you're coming into someone's office and you got to make them do this, that scene has a beginning and an end. Mm-hmm. All right. So it's gonna, that's writing. This writing is, dialogue is great. Dialogue's great writing too, but the structure is also the writing, and the bottom line is like a lot. Like Milos, for example, Tim. I mean, Ed Wood is like line for line our film. When Big Eye is probably the same thing. But Milos was, he wanted outside input from everybody. He wanted everyone to contribute things. So there's there's a lot more improvisation in both those films, but they're what happens is you improvise on the set, and so you're filming. Maybe our scene is 1 page long, so it's still hi, how are you, John? Blah blah blah, and you got to get to like, well, fuck you at the end. All right, but there's stuff in between where that gets them there. so in the one page should be like a minute. If you're filming it and you worked it out as somebody, those actors can talk for 2 minutes or whatever, do their whole thing, but they still got to enter one way, leave another way. So when you got to go back to the editing room, and all of a sudden that can't be a 5-minute scene.
Yeah.
So you cut back to what's the point of that scene? Should we just throw the whole scene out? What's the point? Oh, the point is he's got to get to where he's mad at the guy. So you wind up cutting in the cutting room, and it ends up being the script pages. It ends up being the script pages, except some kind of unrepeatable moment that occurred. That some little thing that made, that just seems like, and this might just be a changing of a word here or there, but it's just more that they made it their own. But it's still still the script. It's not, and sometimes actors, it's more actors because they're bringing so much to it. They're bringing their life to it. That's not writing. That's part of the actor's job. Like directors sometimes say, "Oh, I changed. You had this thing, but I put the car coming in first." That's directing. That's different than writing. So Scott and I aren't like worked up about that too much. You hire Eddie Murphy to play Rudy Ray Moore, and Eddie's pretty faithful to the script, but Eddie's gonna drop a lot more F-bombs than than we type in script, because that's just the nature of his comedy.
Yeah.
So, and you want that.
Yeah.
You don't want
that's why you hired him.
Eddie exactly.
No, I think that's totally right. I think a lot of people, when they think of improvisation, they think of some like free floating thing that goes nowhere. But yeah, it's true. Like even when I was doing my acting training, and the text is everything. Like that's why we spend so much time learning the lines, because even if you improvise, that's the lines. The lines are guiding you, and without them, you're nothing. So Correct. I think that's totally true. And
right,
I would hate
because you'll see it in true improvising, where you can just feel. To me, that feels almost more fake than people doing their lines, because you just see people trying to think of the next thing. So that's where you get a lot of one actor repeating what the other one said. Like, say something to me. Just say anything to me. That's me a question.
How are you?
Oh, how am I? How am I? Huh?
Yeah.
How am I? Well, how am I? That you see that in a lot of stuff. And as great as Cassavetes is, there's a lot of that where they just sort of like, you can tell that they're just sort of repeating what the last person said while they think of something to say. As opposed to just really living in the moment. I haven't repeated anything you said the entire time until then.
I think repeating is good for like when you're rehearsing and getting into it. But like once you're on set, you don't have time for that. Right. You need to get to the point. Yeah, totally. Right. When we were just talking about improvisation, I just remembered, in Dog Day Afternoon, when I was going to say Michael Corleone, when Al Pacino asks Cazale, where do you want to go? And what country do you want to go? And he says Wyoming. Yeah. That was improvised, apparently.
Yes.
And that's just priceless. And it's not like a hilarious moment when you watch the film, but it just crystallizes this character as like, oh, he's a bit out of it, and it's kind of scary because he's so calm, but he's out of it. Right. Yeah. But
what's funny also about that is the Cazale would always ask questions. He felt like part of his method to playing inhabiting characters, he would ask lots and lots of questions, endless questions, and he felt like even questions didn't necessarily have to have an answer, but asking that question will get your character to a certain point. So there was something on Dog Day Afternoon, think maybe concerned. There's a part where his character doesn't want to be referred to as a homosexual on TV or something like this, and he gets all worked up about that. But like they were shooting it, and he asked Lumet, like, well, why am I saying that? And Lumet would talk to him, and apparently they went off to a little private thing, and it went on for like 20 minutes. Well, why would I say it? Why would I say that? And finally, Lumet said, "You know why you say it? Because it's written that way in the script. Not to say the fucking line or whatever, So it was, and Cazale completely accepted that.
Oh, right. Okay.
He accepted that as even part of the character. Sometimes you say things and there isn't. You just got
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I saw an interview with Meryl Streep, who was his partner until he passed away, and she said that he would always, when they were working on characters together, or like helping each other out, he would always show her that they were always other ways to do the character. And she said that she really kept that in her memory because you can always dig deeper or ask questions. Just keep asking questions and be like, well, why would I do it this way and not this other way? Because maybe that's better. And I think you can really feel that in all of his parts because they're always unexpected. Like rewatching, especially Dog Day, I was so shocked by how scary he is in his vulnerability. Like in the fact that you feel like he's a ticking bomb and he might just explode at some point because he's just so scared. And that's a very specific... It makes sense that the character was actually 19 because that's kind of a puerile way to behave, but it also works as this character.
Yeah, you said the perfect word, a ticking bomb. He's like there's a powder keg sitting there waiting to go off, but he's also not really threatening at the same time. It's that contradiction where he does it in so many of his parts where it's like he's one thing, but he's also something else. He's not playing one thing. He rarely is playing one thing.
He's got that complexity of, human beings.
Yeah. And you brought up Meryl Streep, and Meryl Streep really, they met, I think he was doing Measure for Measure for Joe Papp in the park. And, she really loved him and really took care of him as he got sick. And I mean, there was a lot, I think the actors really had a lot of affection towards John. I mean, he had cancer before the Deer Hunters started. And, it was basically if you're sick, you can't get insurance and your movie can't really get made. So, but De Niro put up his salary to pay for the bond to get Cazale in the film because he wanted Cazale in the movie. I think there's just a great deal of affection for him. And one of the scenes I'd say we should talk about it a little bit because I think it might be one of his best scenes in his whole body of work is when I think it's the second to last scene in Godfather 2 where he comes back to Tahoe and he sort of explains himself to Pacino. And Michael Corleone is typical Michael Corleone, and Cazale is sort of like, that's the whole, I'm smart, I'm not dumb like other people think I am, I'm smart. And so he's actually, I could see another actor thinking, this is the time I'm going to stand up to my brother, and this, my brother shuts me down again. And there's a little bit of that. But instead, Cazale plays it on this lounge chair that flops around. Yeah, he's talking to Michael, confessing. He's already dead for the most part, and so and when he finally does it, he instantly and Michael shuts him down. He backs down. There's a bunch of times in conversation in Godfather movies where his character sort of stands up. He sort of he's
trying to take the space he deserves, but then he just.
Correct. And then the person shuts him down. Michael, you can't talk to Mo Green like that. And it's like, don't ever take sides with anyone in the family, again. And it's like, and so there's a moment when you just see his face. I mean, it's also interesting as an actor. He's full of, I wouldn't call them tics because they're not attention drawing. They're not like, but he's always like he does a lot of looking down. He does a lot of looking away and kind of like, there's just a lot of that. And so that's what happens. Even when he sort of like tries to stand up for himself against Michael Corleone, something will happen. He'll totally go back to where he was.
I think it's because, like we were saying, like he really understands this character. And if you think of Fredo trying to stand up, like he already is defeated and he already thinks that... In a way, like if he has to ask for space, that means he's already lost. I mean, it's your family. Right. They should respect you. So he's already beaten down and there's a lot of despair in that. So yeah, totally.
I think he said, or someone said like, he's not playing weakness. He's letting weakness inform his character, if that makes sense. He's letting weakness be a part of who Fredo is. Totally. And when Fredo's in his element, when he's in Vegas and he's like, he says a little, basically a small time hood pimp, he's Mr. Party and Entertainment. But the second Michael comes and Michael doesn't want to see other girls in the room, he totally, he's lost because he thought he was doing something good, and then Michael just shuts him down completely.
He goes back to how he was before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I think we've covered it this time.
I think we have.
Yeah. Well,
this is why I did. Initially I thought I was going to do Barbara Stanwyck, but then I looked at her filmography and I was like, oh my God, Barbara Stanwyck, that's like 40 movies. So let's pick somebody who, pick someone who has just a limited amount, so we can get through it in 1 hour. But Barbara Stanwyck, you should do Barbara Stanwyck sometime.
I love Barbara Stanwyck, but
she's the best.
Yeah, there was a season of her films at the BFI, well, before lockdown and everything, and I loved it so much. But yeah, you picked not only a guy who had 5 films, but only 4 characters. And also,
yes, that's crazy.
Did you
I thought about that when I was like preparing for today. I was like, oh, this is really weird. He's like, everyone talks about the 5 films, but like he plays Fredo.
Yeah, and also he's got 2 characters he's got 1 character in 2 films called Fredo, and then 2 other characters in 2 different films called Stan.
Yeah,
and then Sal.
Yeah, there's Mike. I think De Niro's could name Mike in Deer Hunter, and then you got Michael Corleone and the other ones.
Literally, there are 4 names
Sonny,
in America.
Sonny Corleone, and Sonny is the bank robber. That's really weird. I never thought of that. Crazy.
But I mean, 5 films, but what films? And this was a great episode anyway. And you talked a lot about
5
your own
film
experience.
and 3 directors.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
What directors though?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Larry, and
right.
Speak soon. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of You Gotta Act. Find us on social media at You Gotta Act and let us know what you think. See you next time.